It's Halloween, and you know what that means. It's time for another tale of blood-chilling terror from the railways, where the whistle sounds in the night like the wail of the banshee, and the steam drifts like the unquiet souls of the deceased, and where the next departure may be your final one. Today's tale of horror takes us to Croydon? Oh, come on! This is another story that comes from W.B. Herbert's book Railway Ghosts from 1985, and it takes place at Addiscombe carriage sheds. Now, I've been to Addiscombe a number of times on this channel. Actually, it last cropped up a couple of weeks ago, I think, so I hope I'm not being too repetitive for my regular viewers. Addiscombe was a station in Croydon built by the South Eastern Railway and opened in 1864 with the intention of giving the company a foothold in Croydon. They had a rivalry with another company, the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, and this was their way of striking into their rivals' territory in the hope of extending to Redhill, and probably on to Brighton. It didn't quite work out that way. The station was built on land formerly owned by the East India Company's military college. When it comes to evil megacorporations, it's hard to beat having your own private army, but that's the East India Company for you. When the land was sold up, it was developed by a gentleman named Addiscombe Thorne, which is a heck of a thing to call your child. The station was originally named Addiscombe Road, then Croydon Addiscombe, then Addiscombe Croydon, then, finally, just Addiscombe in 1955. It shouldn't be confused with the tram stop named Addiscombe, which is on the site of Bingham Road Station, because nothing is ever simple. The station was rebuilt in 1899 and lasted until 1997. Later that year the station closed, and so too did the line leading up to it. Walking the route of the abandoned line is easy. The line from Elmer's End into Croydon is now part of the London tram network, and the line to Addiscombe branched off that at Black Horse Road. The route is now a linear park. There's very little of the station to see today. There's this wall, and otherwise all there is to tell is the relative age of the buildings compared to those around them. If you come across a long, narrow site with conspicuously modern buildings, it may well be a former railway line, as a general note. Now, Addiscombe was not the most popular line. The problem was that East Croydon Station, which was not too far away, offered a much quicker service into London. From 1902, electric trams, not to be confused with the current ones, ran along the road outside the station into town, making East Croydon a far more attractive prospect. The line had its customers during rush hour, but was nothing compared to other stations in Croydon. In 1923, the line was taken over by the Southern Railway, who reported that the stations were dingy, the trains were dilapidated, the service was infrequent, and it was usually late. Modernisation was in order, the company felt. So, in 1926, the line was electrified. The area around the station had developed a lot since the 1860s, but there was still space to put in a carriage shed. So that's what they did, with space to store up to 6 trains. Electrification knocked a quarter of an hour off journey times and increased passenger numbers, but in 1939 the service was drastically cut back due to wartime economies. This resulted in a kind of vicious circle. With a poor service, fewer people used the trains, so the company reduced the service, so it became even less attractive to passengers, and so on. By the 1990s, only a handful of passengers used the station outside of rush hour. It wasn't much of a surprise that it wouldn't make it into the 21st century. In fact, were it not for the carriage sheds, it seems very likely that the station would have closed long before it did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It seems that there was something off about Addiscombe carriage sheds. Stories were told of gruesome accidents. A train driver had supposedly been killed at the station in the early 1900s. A shunter was killed when he was crushed between 2 carriages. A hot water boiler exploded, killing an unspecified number of staff. And a driver, second man, and blacksmith lost their lives when a train ran through the end of the shed. Perhaps mere coincidence, or perhaps something more malevolent. Then came reports of strange phenomena. Number 4 Road was reported to be strangely cold and unpleasant, and staff were reluctant to stable trains there. Number 4 Road was also the site of the shunter's demise. There were mysterious sounds at night, the unmistakable noise of moving trains, even though the shed was unstaffed and the doors were locked. This was so prevalent that it was reported by all the signalmen stationed in the old-fashioned mechanical signal box. One was so convinced that he'd heard a moving train that he even went into the shed and checked the brakes on all the trains in there. They were all firmly on. 2 staff reported a door handle rattling on its own. Perhaps the eeriest sighting of all was that of a grey figure who would emerge from the shed and walk towards individual members of staff. As the figure drew closer, it was noted to have a blurred and indistinct face. When braver staff members tried to approach it, the apparition would disappear. To quote Mr. Herbert, "Although many doubt the truth of the stories, there is too much corroboration to dismiss them out of hand." The station regularly made it onto lists of the most haunted in Britain. In the 1990s, new trains, the networkers, were introduced to replace the slam-door trains with the rattly handles. Addiscombe carriage shed was relegated to storing these older trains, which was not an optimistic sign for the future. Drivers ceased to be based there. In April 1993, it closed for good. When the trams returned, they took over the old Sanderstead line and Addiscombe was sacrificed. But tales of hauntings persist. I've even encountered the claim that the reason the old railway route hasn't been built upon was because of the fear of supernatural retribution. So, perhaps the spookiest and hardest to explain tale of haunting that this channel has covered so far. I mean, how can so many people have encountered the same phenomena on so many occasions? However, there are points that give me pause. The cause given for the hauntings is generally given as one of the accidents that befell staff members at various times. But there seems to be a lack of detail regarding these accidents. None of the more, shall we say, straightforward histories of the station mention these incidents. I haven't been able to find names or dates, or anything that might identify the victims. However, one advantage I have over Mr. Herbert is that I have a comments section, and it turns out that the explanation is actually very simple. According to a number of former staff members commenting on previous videos, the whole thing was a series of pranks. A running joke played on new recruits as a hazing ritual to freak them out. In fact, Herbert even mentions a story of old hands pranking newbies, and he fails to put 2 and 2 together. And as these things do, the stories of spooks and spectres spread beyond the sheds without context, and were taken at face value. There were embellishments added over the years, speculation turning into statements of fact, and before you know it, there's a curse on Addiscombe. So that's the somewhat disappointing truth of it. There was no ghost at Addiscombe. There were probably no mysterious fatalities. The only ghost is the spectre of British Rail cutbacks. And in the end, isn't that the most frightening thing of all? Not really, but I wasn't sure how to end this. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this spooky tale. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. As well as railway ghosts, today's main sources were London Bridge to Addiscombe by Vic Mitchell and Keith Smith, and London's Disused Railway Stations, Outer South East London, by J.E. Connor. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the Grey Spectre to my signalman on the night shift. And I will see you all again very soon. Happy Halloween, and cheerio.